Welcome to another episode of Planet Waves TV. My name is Eric Francis Coppolino, here to explain a bit about the forthcoming astrology, in particular the forthcoming full moon event, and then that's followed by a new moon event 2 weeks later. The two are integrally related, and so I'm going to take you on a little bit more of an advanced tour of how you work astrology and look at the interrelationship between events and also the interrelationship of events that are in the foreground and events that are in the background. So we're going to take a look at that. So first, quick overview. On Saturday, May 21st, there is a full moon. The full moon happens with the sun in early Gemini and the moon in early Sagittarius. The full moon can only happen the full moon in Sag can only happen with the sun in Gemini. And that's convenient because the sun enters Gemini on May 20th, Friday, coming right up. So hold that thought. One thing this is implying is that, first of all, the sun is running through the last few degrees of the sign Taurus. There's a certain feeling that comes with the sun running through the late degrees of a sign, and that is like, let's get on with this cycle. There can also be a sense of release at the end where unusual things happen. There's kind of an opening when the sun reaches the end of a sign. And so I always like to point out when the sun is getting late in the cycle of one of the signs that it leaves things open for what you might think of as unusual developments, things that you might not have anticipated, might not have expected, and this can often be things that are better than you were expecting. Things you consider to be impossible can suddenly manifest and suddenly happen. Okay, so with that in mind, the sun in early Gemini here, see that there, will be opposed by the moon in early Sagittarius. Yeah. And the planets I've got in here are mostly planets that are in the foreground. What I'm calling the foreground, typically the faster moving points. One exception here is Mr. Nessus. This is the one slow mover. And this is what I'm showing you here is called an aspect pattern. All things in astrology are related to other things. Ultimately, everything is related to everything, but in the chart, there are going to be certain elements that really stand out as being interrelated to other ones. And we've got a very good example of this in the full moon chart. For example, the sun is conjunct this most important asteroid called Vesta, the holder of space, the tender of the flame, the asteroid of devotion above all else. Opposite that, the moon is going to be conjunct retrograde Mars in Sagittarius. Now, we've talked a lot about this retrograde Mars in recent weeks, and in the most recent edition of Planet Waves newsletter on Thursday night, I talked about how this Mars here is retrograding, how do we do this, back in this direction towards Scorpio. And so we have a full moon that takes place 1 degree away from Mars, not even 1 degree away from Mars, with Mars at right at the end of its trip through Sagittarius. Am I sweating all over the place? Yeah, wow, it's one of those days where it's like the weather changes every 5 minutes. Okay, so this in turn is related to these planets. So everything with a low number value is going to be related to the full moon. And so it makes an aspect pattern. This aspect pattern is called a T-square. Let's just draw in that T into the T-square here. That's why it's called a T-square, is because it's in the shape of a T. And if we looked, we would certainly find things in the early degrees of Virgo, but for now we're going to leave that out. We're just going to work with this particular pattern. Okay, so the full moon represents a kind of a maximum tension between the sun and the moon. And in our reality, the moon provides a really important kind of balancing agent that we need. It's kind of like an elevator has a counterweight that runs in the background of the elevator, right? Sweating profusely here. Okay. And so when the elevator car goes up, I don't have anything I can quite demonstrate with, the weight pulls the car. The weight is pulling down and it pulls the car up, and then the car goes down and it pulls the weight up. And that's the relationship of the sun and the moon and the earth. Okay, so we live on a planet, and around that planet, oscillating very quickly, one cycle per month is the moon. And this creates a couple of things. First of all, it creates a gyroscopic effect, which provides a sense of stability on the planet. And furthermore, it provides a dependable pulse cycle that moves things. It moves women's bodies. I assume on some level it moves men's bodies. It moves the tides. It moves our emotions and our feelings. And you can just tell that there is motion connected to everything related to the moon-earth cycle, right? So this thing is whipping around us, and it's pulling the water in its direction. It's shifting everything on the planet as it moves. And when we get the sun-moon opposition against the moon and the sun, look at this very clear image of the full moon, right? The moon is in early Sagittarius, and the sun is in early Gemini. And they are opposite one another. That's the full moon. And we get a moment of maximum tension between the sun and the moon. This is why the full moon can be so stressful for so many people. It's why it's good about helping break deadlocks. This is one of the great things about the full moon. Okay, so in this aspect pattern, in the bottom of the T-square, there is Nessus and Pallas. I'm not going to interpret too heavily what those mean, but they are there. They are in the conversation. And by the way, with the visuals, I'm going to show you some structure, and then on Tuesday in Planet Waves FM, I will do more a slower, thoughtful interpretation using acoustic space, which is much more suited to what we are doing. Okay, next. Here is the same chart, only I've removed the aspect pattern around the full moon, and I've included 3 slow movers, Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune. And this Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune pattern is like the most important pattern pretty much going on right now, with one possible exception, the Uranus Eris conjunction. This is describing a huge amount of tension in the background. So this is composed of several things. And it's a rare event to have these things line up like this. Jupiter is square Saturn, first of all. We're not hearing a lot about that because we're more lost in the Saturn Neptune square. It was a long night last night and a fun one. Okay, so the Saturn Neptune square is been getting more attention from astrology in the discussion. It's in theory more important, but it actually cannot be taken out of the context of the Jupiter Saturn square as well. And so at the same time, Jupiter is opposite Neptune. So there's this tension going on in the background between the Pisces planets and Saturn. And so this is a special kind of tension. And it tends to be, first of all of these oppositions and squares want resolution. The thing about, for example, the Saturn-Neptune square is, it is not resolved that easily. It is generally only resolved by some huge breakthrough, technological breakthrough, emotional breakthrough, psychic breakthrough. Basically, it's the aspect saying, the only way to solve this problem is to do something that is impossible. And you think, well, how do you do something that's impossible? Well, the reality is things happening that were impossible yesterday all the time. That's the whole thing about impossible. It only means it was impossible yesterday, not today. And so you might ask yourself in your life, what's the thing that you considered impossible yesterday that you actually must do or want to do today, and you're going to do it with gusto. Okay, so now let's put these charts together. And we can see that here is the moon, the full moon conjunct Mars, right? And that's going to, full moon conjunct Mars is going to have some passion. Full moon conjunct Mars is going to bring to the forefront all the questions of Mars retrograde. Opposite the sun, and then here's this Nessus Pallas alignment here. But also at the same time, here is Jupiter in Virgo and Saturn in Sag and Neptune in Pisces going on at the same time, right? So there's a lot of tension in this chart, and notice that it is all in the current scenario, the way I'm illustrating it, especially coming from the mutable signs. And the mutable signs require movement. The mutable signs are saying, okay, don't be so stuck. Don't necessarily think that all you can do is lurch into taking action. There are options between being stuck and lurching ahead and taking action. And the mutable signs are suggesting that you consider the possibilities and that you do this thing that the mutable signs being Gemini, Virgo, Sag, and Pisces, all of them represented in this chart. Right, here's your Gemini, Virgo, Sag, look at all that Sag, Pisces, look at all that Pisces. There's even more in Pisces. I've even left out Mr. Chiron, who's at the end of the sign. Sadly, we could have Chiron in Pisces forever. It would be a beautiful thing. Okay, so there's Mr. Chiron back in there and put it in pencil. All right, so the tension in this chart is saying, resolve me. Resolve me by considering your options. Resolve me by not being so fixed in your viewpoint. This is a huge problem among Earthlings, is lodging into a viewpoint and not being able to change that viewpoint. I mean, how many write in pen and how many write in pencil? I mean, pencils are not really very popular these days. I am partial to pencils because they have erasers. You can actually take away something that you've written and write something new again. And so I'm suggesting that you write in pencil during this. Consider your options in pencil and consider the possibilities and sketch things and experiment with things and consider them. And if you hang loose during this astrology, particularly through the week as the sun works its way through the fixed earth sign Taurus, right? That itself is going to create tension as it works toward the end of the fixed earth sign Taurus. And there's something wanting to release at the end of the fixed earth sign Taurus. And that release point happens when the sun enters Gemini on the 20th, and it's going to enter Gemini in a conjunction to Vesta. And Vesta is saying, hold space open for your purpose, define your purpose. And very likely that your purpose is some purpose of an idea that you're considering or a dialogue that you want to have. That is the nature of Gemini, and it's the nature of the mutable signs in general. So the theme of this is flexibility, because we have all of this tension that we're dealing with in the form of squares and oppositions, especially a square, especially an opposition of the sun and the moon, square all these other points, right? Be flexible, hang loose, don't cling, and know when you're clinging. The signs of clinging are resistance and pain and an intractable viewpoint, usually demonstrated by argument and by intellectualization. Take a step back and observe what you're feeling and observe what you're thinking, and be brave about rethinking things. About you know, once you've thought something through and you get some clarity, that doesn't mean the conversation's over, because actuality forever changes. Everything is moving. All of these points are always moving. The fact that they're represented here in a still image is a kind of a fractal image of a chaos pattern. And the chaos pattern is constantly moving, and we get a moment where we take a little snapshot of it. Now, this chart, notice now, just to sum up, there's two aspect patterns. There's one in the low number value of the mutable signs, and then there's one in the middle right? The low ones are the 1, the 2, the 4, the 5, the 1, the 2 here. The ones in the middle are Jupiter at 13, Saturn at 14, Neptune at 11, all related, each telling their own part of the story. Now let's watch what happens. I was originally going to introduce this as twin charts because it's Gemini and it's twin charts, full moon, new moon. So here's your next chart, which is the June 4th new moon. You can tell it is the new moon because the moon and the sun are exactly conjunct at 14 degrees Gemini and 53 minutes. By the way, this is exactly opposite the great attractor Laniakea, the super cluster of galaxies. So this is a big lunation amplified by the fact that it's opposite the great attractor. But we don't even need that right now. It's there. It's kind of lurking in the background like Mother Goddess. But check out this alignment of the sun, the moon, and Venus all gather together right at the moment of this new moon. And that is going to be in a close square to Neptune, it's going to be in a close square to Jupiter, and it's going to be in an opposition to Saturn. So what began as these two seemingly separate aspect patterns, one in the low degrees of the mutable signs and one in the middle degrees of the mutable signs, transforms into an alignment of just about all of the involved points. I've switched some of the points out, but pretty much it transforms into a grand cross. This is called a grand cross pattern. When you have this, all four angles of any one cross of the heavens, in this case the mutable cross, aligned with each other. So we see these red things indicate that there's a square. These purple lines here indicate that there's an opposition. And so we can see that the square is indicated and the cross is indicated, and the grand cross aspect is sometimes called a grand square aspect. You can see that it is both. It is both a square and a cross, right? Good. All right. So the overall message here is that there's a shift of consciousness coming up, and you can put your surfboard in the water, paddle out, and wait for the wave to come in. Rather than sitting on the beach and watching the wave or not paying attention, having the wave crash over your head, you actually get to do something with this. And from my experience as an astrologer, and I think a fairly surface level, obvious reading of the charts, there is a big shift of consciousness possible. And one of the reasons I say that is because we are seeing something which is unusual, which is a set of alignments that bring together fast-moving inner planets like the sun and the moon, Mercury, and Venus, with a slower moving pattern in the background. And so what this will have the effect of doing is, over the next approximately 3 weeks, bringing things that were in the background out to the foreground. You can think of this Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune alignment here, these three slow movers, as being a kind of a background factor, right? They're slower moving, they're distant. You can't even really see Neptune with the bare eye. And the foreground pattern here, remember this one? This is just the ones in the lower degrees of the mutables, and then they meet up, and everything aligns in time for the June 4th, like a big party where everyone comes to the party. Now, there are going to be astrologers who interpret this in harsh ways because it is the dreaded grand cross aspect, and it's not going to work for me, not in this astrology office. Yes, it indicates potential challenges, but remember that most of those challenges are on the level of the mutable signs. They are on the level of what we can think about, what we can consider, and what we have the possibility to change. And the most vital thing we have the possibility to change is our minds. We think that mind, the level of mind, seems to be the most stuck thing. You can't get anyone to change their minds. I spent An hour last night talking with a fireman at the local fire station about why the city won't buy a new ladder truck. The old one's 20 years old, and everyone just seems to be stuck. And like, this is just like the story of politics and the story of many people's relationships. You would think mind would be the most flexible thing that there is. And all these planets in the mutable signs are saying mind is the most flexible thing there is. You have one. You are flexible. I'll have more to say about this in Tuesday's edition of Planet Waves FM, where I will work in acoustic space, not in visual space. Boy, there is a big difference. I'm reading a book by Eric and Marshall McLuhan talking about the history of how visual space came to be what it is. Right? I think we take it for granted, but why is audio so different than audio with video? Exclusively audio. You're listening to effectively the primeval forest at night. When we then illuminate this and we create all this geometry, like look at all the geometry in the background here, right? There's all these lines and relationships, and I've got my ruler and my cutting mat and my diagrams. This changes things a lot. I'm not sure it makes them worse. It definitely makes them different, and I'll be back in a couple of days in purely acoustic space using this microphone, not this cute one stuck to my vest. All right. Love. Till next time. Bye for now.